Welcome in, everyone. I'm Gerard Romalo, and this is The Vegas Verdict, where we take a look at local and national issues of interest. We offer legal perspective whenever possible, and ultimately, we hand down a verdict. Today, we are talking about something that is really on the national news level at this point. We're talking about rent control. Is Nevada ready for rent control? We have two special guests with us today. Francesca Gilbert is here. She is with the Gilbert team, a longtime real estate expert, advocate, broker, etc. And full disclosure, she's a friend. Back when I was doing my reporting on Channel 3, we would have her come on as an expert on air several times, did a great job, counseled us through the housing crisis and much more. So thanks for being with us, Francesca. Also with us is Ryan Hamilton. He's a candidate for County Commission, District 5. That is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, that's in the kind of the northern part of the city, partly Summerlin or...
District A, it's in the south
District
part
A,
of the
excuse
valley.
me, District
right.
A.
So it actually goes all the way down to Arizona. It encompasses Laughlin. It has the east side of the I-15 at Krim.
I was totally wrong. I botched that completely.
No worries at all.
Yeah.
It's very hard to describe. It's got Silverado Ranch. It's got Anthem Country Club.
Gotcha.
On the west side of the valley, it's pretty easy. It's Durango on the west, Flamingo on the north, Windmill on the south, and the Las Vegas Boulevard on the east.
Lots of responsibility in that area, lots of growth, lots of things to consider. So we are happy to have both of you here today. We're talking about rent control. We're going to dive right in. But first, let's take a look at this short video, some recent news clips of what's been in the news regarding rent control and affordability, etc. Take a look.
Affordable housing, a crisis here in the Valley, from not making enough money to pay rent to seniors on a fixed income.
Even if they raised minimum wage, it still wouldn't, I don't think, help. You know what I mean? No matter what, 2 jobs is what you got to do.
Now, a recent study is actually showing that nearly 60% of Nevadans are having to spend more than 30% of their annual income in housing.
It's that same rejection 59-year-old Cynthia Gill keeps getting, as she calls apartments hoping she can afford.
If I don't make 3 times the amount and I'm on Social Security disability where I can afford to pay rent every month without fail, would I still be able to qualify and move in?
And I think, have collectively agreed that we want high skill or high wage type jobs to start showing up here, which means we're going to have to build the facilities, inventory.
If you're thinking about moving to Vegas and you want to rent a property before officially putting down some roots, then it's important to know the average rental prices.
I personally am going through an owner. So when you go through an owner, you get better value for your money.
All right, so no question, people are feeling the pinch these days. We keep hearing about inflation, the economy. No matter where you are financially, certainly you're aware that things have changed. It's a challenge for a lot of folks. And as of just 2 or 3 months ago, the Biden administration tossed out the idea, who knows if anything will come of it, especially now, but tossed out the idea of a potential 5% cap on rents nationwide. I'm not sure how they would enforce that, but obviously that would be a form of rent control, and it probably raised some eyebrows if you're on the tenant side of things. Francesca, let's start with you. What are your thoughts? What are you hearing from maybe some of your landlord owner folks, and does this come up periodically?
I think it does come up, and we are definitely very aware of the rent control. The National Association of Realtors, who ultimately is a lobbying organization along with the other responsibilities that they have been very, against rent control because of the unintended consequences of rent control. Yeah. And what we're seeing here in Las Vegas is that with prices rising and interest rates being what they are today, that it's very difficult for a new landlord to purchase a property and have the rent that might have been effective 3-4 years ago cover their payment. Yeah. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of rising rents, is because people are purchasing rental properties in a rising interest rate environment.
And that brings up the question of inventory and what's available. I know Governor Lombardo recently talked about opening up some of the BLM land and seeing if we can develop. And is development, do you think, and Ryan, I'll have you jump in on this, a part of the solution?
Unquestionably, it is.
It's a supply and demand thing, is it
not? It
not?
absolutely is. And
Yeah.
I think you can look at cities where rent is decreasing, like Austin, and cities where rent has historically been increasing, like San Francisco, and you can see that one of the primary reliefs that Austin has is new inventory hitting the market quickly. And that's driven down rents there, and it's obviously because landlords are having to compete for tenants, and there's more on the market. One of the problems that we face here is that we're an artificial island. 80% of our surface area is owned by the federal government, and so we're restricted on what can be built. And that definitely drives the price of rent up.
I think it's also important, the lands bill, which is currently under review, to release a bunch of land that is owned by the BLM or Bureau of Land Management, not approved yet. But if that does get approved, that would definitely add a huge chunk of land that will allow for building.
Right.
And we've looked at different ideas, and across the country there are a lot of office buildings that are being converted into some sort of rentals. Here, we have city, we have county. There's a lot of different overlays in terms of who's in charge of what. I'm sure Ryan is well aware of that. Yes. But, in the city, there's not a lot available that could be converted, right? The number of buildings that they have that would be appropriate for that use are fewer than what's in the county. So there's a lot of different, even very hyper-local versions of rents and what could be done to put more supply in the market, right? But nationally, it is a problem. The problem is, one of very, very simple. I have all the Cabbage Patch dolls, even though they're ugly, and everybody wants them. Or, if you watch the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's looking for that toy that everybody wants at Christmas time, right? And it's very, very similar. We need more toys.
Yeah, I like that analogy. There's another fact out there, and that is that whenever there is a problem, government's going to come in with some kind of a solution. I'm not sure that more regulation and I don't necessarily love this federal approach, because I think not every city is the same. We don't have the same parameters, and certainly Las Vegas is unique on many different levels. But wouldn't some kind of mandate potentially discourage development, do you think? I mean, why would I want to be a landlord if I'm only going to get a very minimal increase when the rest of the world is dealing with inflation and going up around me?
I think that's what other jurisdictions which have experimented with rent controls have experienced.
Yeah.
The payoff just isn't there. A lot of times when you're investing in real estate, there's a speculation element, there's a risk element involved, and you want to make sure that you're going to be able to capitalize on your investment and get the returns that you put in. So it sort of pencils on the common sense level. And again, you see in reality, that seems to be the experience of the jurisdictions that have experimented with rent control.
Yeah. Francesca, for the longest time since I've been here, Las Vegas has almost been viewed as an investor's market on some level, maybe even to a fault during the housing crisis. Is it still sort of viewed that way? I guess it depends on where you're coming from, right?
I think it does depend on the market that you come from. But overall, Las Vegas is still looked at as a location where you can purchase a relatively new home in a relatively nice area, often in an HOA or with a gate or with amenities and parks and other offerings. And landlords like that because they feel that their rents are stronger. If you buy a property that is located in a gated community in Sky Canyon and you have access to all of the really cool stuff that's available there, and you have a little community park
manicured,
and pool,
areas.
It raises your rent. So, and that helps offset any increases that might be due, to interest rates. I think that some of the issues that aren't often spoken about in terms of rent control are really very common sense. If you lower rents, demand increases. If demand increases, rents go back up. It's the same situation that is happening with our housing market right now. Everyone's talking about, well, I'm going to wait to buy a house until interest rates go down by 1% or 2%. Sounds very logical. You and approximately 1.4 million other people are waiting for interest rates to go down 1%.
Right.
And when they do, and those people come back into the market, it causes
Boom.
a frenzy,
Yeah.
which then leads to the craziness that we had in, say, 2004, 5, and again during COVID.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
prices went up to levels that people were like, well, I didn't see that coming, right? So again, unintended consequences. I think we have to be very cautious and deliberate in our approach.
I have a couple of figures here, and I can't speak to the accuracy. One comes from Zillow. The average rent in Nevada is about $2,100 a month. Now, that obviously encompasses if you're staying in a home or you're in an apartment. So there's a broad, there's a broad spectrum there. But $2,100 seems very steep to me. The average income in Las Vegas, this is according to the U.S. Census Bureau, and this is for Las Vegas specifically, is $3,100. That doesn't make a lot. I mean, the math doesn't really add up. So
I agree. And I have some statistics also from the Las Vegas Realtor Multiple Listing Service. Statistically, over the past 10 years, the historic sales price trend for leases has been right around $2,400 a month.
Wow.
And that does average houses, large houses, houses on acreage. I mean, it's sort of an all-encompassing number. But there is a tremendous amount of increased inventory right now as well. I did a quick check today, and
I knew we'd get the up-to-date numbers with Francesca.
I wanted to be accurate. So right now, as of this morning at about 9:30, there were 3,850 available rental properties in the multiple listing system. 2,300 of those were single family, 1,300 were townhouse and condo, and then another 192 of maybe mobile home and others.
Yeah.
Comparatively, if you go to apartments.com, no plug intended, there are 16,168 properties for rent on apartments.com. Of those, 5,766 are under $1,500 a month. Of those, approximately 2,400 are 2 bedrooms under $1,500 a month.
Yeah.
So it's not that there's no inventory. It's that the inventory is probably dependent on where you want to live and what amenities are available to you. But I think the income question is a whole different question. Does a landlord have to require 3 times the amount of rent to approve someone to take that unit? Are there other alternatives? Could they put a larger security deposit, or is there something else that might assist? Those are perhaps some of the avenues that no one has, I don't want to say no one's looked at, but that aren't looked at as often as just saying straight, you need to make X amount of money.
I love that. And I think, Ryan, you would agree with me that markets have a tendency to work themselves out. Landlords, we've seen when there's a lot of competition, they get creative on their incentives. They offer, different types of things that might be attractive to a potential tenant, might make you choose this property or this home over the next home. In the little video that we showed, there was one gentleman that said, I prefer to deal with private owners because basically you can negotiate something with them, and maybe they're offering something a little bit different than a corporate apartment, might. Do you think these things do work themselves out, or are we headed down a road that's only going to get worse?
It's tough to say. I think normally you'd be able to say if there were one wrinkle in the economy, it would largely work itself out. But Nevadans are facing record high rent prices. Right now we have the second highest grocery prices for the state, the second highest car insurance prices. We're regularly in the top 5 for fuel prices. And so I think not just the cost of housing, but these other factors, really day-to-day essentials are through the roof, and that's driving the perception that maybe housing is much more expensive than these numbers reflect, which I think are actually surprising. I'm encouraged to hear.
I was surprised.
Yeah, as far as the inventory goes,
and
100%.
at that price point, right? It shows that if you really needed a place, you could probably find one at any budget, especially the 2 bedrooms.
Yeah.
But these other factors that are driving consumer maybe exasperation or frustration are definitely real. And I'll mention the county has raised sales tax in the last couple of years as well. And so these are pressures that your average consumer is facing, and they haven't seen their wage growth keep pace. I think a lot of people have seen their purchasing power decrease by as much as 30% with inflation, combined with these other factors. So I don't know. It's tough to say if all of those things are going to work themselves out, and if they're going to work themselves out in time for the people who need economic relief
Right.
to not suffer some really bad consequences before those things get worked out. I understand very much the average person's desire for rent control.
I think we all do on some level.
Yes.
Right. I mean, we've all been there.
Correct.
And you can understand penny pinching and counting your nickels and all
Yes,
of those concepts.
absolutely.
You
It's
know.
tough out there,
Right.
for a lot of people, for a lot of businesses too.
Yeah.
And so it's not fictitious, this desire to want some kind of relief from the increase in prices, which seem to be unending. I think we're now in our, I want to say, 24th month of inflation growth.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's been dramatic.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll point out is that I think most people would like to deal with a smaller landlord, and I think smaller landlords would be responsive to ladies who, like in that reel that we played, had a steady income, that a smaller landlord could verify that, in fact, these are consistent
She had a
government checks.
consistency. She had something she could validate.
Right.
And
so
absolutely.
I think a proposal that I'm certainly much more friendly to is limiting the amount of major corporations like BlackRock, which come in and purchase thousands of homes in a community, really drive up the price of single-family housing.
They monopolize the industry,
Correct.
basically. Yeah.
I think that's a much bigger threat to the market than a lone landlord who has a couple of properties raising his rent consistent
Interesting.
with what the market is. I think we should look at those kinds of limitations and also adjusting some of the regulations that we have for building houses, right? If I go to the county right now and I apply to build a house, my approval process could take months longer than if I did so in the city of Henderson because their regulations are different.
Yeah.
And so we've got to get that squared away.
There's got to be
before we-
continuity on the regulation part.
Yes.
There's got to be efficiency because no one benefits when you drag things out like that.
Especially if you're going to go to your private landlord,
Yeah.
business owners in the county, and ask them to take some kind of cap on what they can charge. The county better make sure that all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in that instance so that they can get housing to market quickly, just as quickly as they can in Las Vegas or City of Henderson. And so I think those are all interventions that could make a meaningful difference in the cost of housing that we should explore before we really go to the landlords and ask them.
I love it. We dive right in. We're already looking at solutions in the very first segment, so I love that. We are going to take a short break here. This is the Vegas Verdict, and we're discussing the idea of rent control. Is Nevada ready for rent control? When we come back, we'll talk about this effort to bring in new industry and, in a sense, bring in new employees. Where are we going to house them? Where are they going to live? And also, this national crisis that we have with an increase in homelessness. Is this rental cost potentially contributing to what we see in the homeless arena? We'll discuss those issues when we come back here on the Vegas Verdict.
If you've been injured in an accident, you don't have to go it alone. At Paul Paddle Law, we understand your injuries aren't just physical. They also bring financial burden and emotional strain. At our firm, it's not just about legal representation. It's about genuine care and commitment. Lock in the attention you deserve from your attorney. We'll get you on the path to recovery. Call Paul Paddle Law. Legal security when you need it.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the Vegas Verdict. Today we're discussing rent control with our guests, Francesca Gilbert and Ryan Hamilton. We've already dived into this pretty deeply, but I think about some of the people who are tenants out there, and we saw in our video clip, one of the ladies was a senior on a fixed income. You know, her Social Security check really doesn't change much. It might go up a percentage point year after year, but when you're getting a $200 rent increase or a $150 rent increase, that's a significant amount. Should there be some kind of protection in place for people specifically like those seniors who are on fixed incomes?
I think the protection is what we would call Section 8 housing. I think, unfortunately, the stigma that's attached to Section 8 housing is not always is not appropriate, meaning it is meant to protect people with fixed income. And if you rent to a tenant that it has a Section 8 voucher, whatever the tenant can't pay is subsidized. And those checks come very routinely with great certainty because they come from the government. And they're actually a good way to make sure that your rent is what you want your
you don't
rent
have to be afraid that you're going to lose your dwelling.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's good for the tenant and it's good for the landlord. But the perception is that it's made for people who have no money.
Right.
And that's not really necessarily the correct
Especially nowadays,
scenario.
there's a pretty big population,
especially
where there's a lot of variation in there, right?
Correct, especially of retired folks that are on fixed income, as you said. And I think that some of the issue goes back to what Ryan was talking about before the break, was that, we're looking at controls meant to handle institutional investors who own perhaps 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 units across the country, many times in multiple LLCs, so that they can protect their situations.
Finagling.
Sure, finagling is a good word.
Yeah.
But really the average landlord who wants to rent their property is looking at a tenant on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
I owned several rental properties in my career, and when I got applications, I looked at them. I tried to meet them because I wanted to just, know who I was renting
See
to.
eye to eye.
Sure. And many times we rented to folks that they told us that they did not get approved somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the solutions were relatively easy. Well, why don't we do extra deposit? Why don't we do this? Why don't you pay every other week for 3 months until you get caught up, or whatever you need to do to make it work? There are ways to help people rent
and stay in there
with integrity, right? But
maybe we just need to get away from the Section 8 title. I don't think that will ever happen.
I think that's part of the problem is the name, right?
The stigma, right?
If we called it incentivized leasing, that sounds very different and much prettier.
I would agree with that. Ryan, let me ask you this, because one of the things that we try to do as a thriving community is bring in new industry, and that's happening on many levels. You look at how sports has kind of grown in Southern Nevada. You look at the movie industry. There's a tech sector that continues to grow, and this is good. You want diversity of economy, but there is a challenge in that they come here and they look for affordable housing. What's available in nice areas? Where are the good schools? The schools is also another draw. When you're elected to office, how do you talk to potential new business owners who are thinking about moving here from California and Illinois and New York and places like that?
You've got to create a community that people want to live in, right? And I think that's getting the basics right. If you ask, a huge number of people on a day-to-day basis what the things they like the least are that they do, number one is commuting to work, and number two is commuting home from work. So if you can make an easy commute for people, and I know we have that relative to Seattle and Los Angeles and some of these other big
100%,
cities, but I think we're rapidly losing that. If you can make the commute stress-free, that's huge. People like access to green space and parks, and they like their parks to be and feel safe. And so if we can create those kinds of amenities, which I would say right now we're going in the wrong direction, at least in the county on those sorts of things, people will move here. It won't take any kind of special incentives. They'll leave their good communities to come to a better one. That's just how people operate. And I think we need to be very guarded about protecting the things that we have now that people in LA are actually leaving their community from. And one of them is Skid Row. It's a huge homeless center, a crime center. Frankly, it's a public health center of problems, right? And we have to make sure that we don't develop any similar or parallel institution or problem, whatever you want to call it, here in Clark County.
Well, let me ask you right there, because I think that's a good pivot point. Is the rental situation currently contributing to this homeless crisis that we see actually on a national level? We have it here. Recently we did a podcast episode, and I was surprised to find out that we have something like 2,000 people living in the tunnels underneath Las Vegas. That's a significantly higher number than I expected. I thought it was in the hundreds, but about 2,000 is pretty significant. So Is the rental situation contributing? What are your thoughts on that, Francesca?
Well, from what I have been able to listen to, and specifically the director of the Las Vegas Rescue Mission, she spoke at our Rotary Club about 2.5 months ago.
Yeah.
And she spoke to that issue, not specifically the tunnels, but folks that aren't living in
homelessness in general.
Yeah, folks that aren't living in the facility that they have. And she did admit that the rescue mission is short on beds, as are probably most institutions across the country, and they're continually looking for ways to correct that. But she said there is a large portion of the population that, even with available beds, even with amenities, with facilities, with help in terms of medical or food or subsidies or anything else, is just not going to live in the rescue mission or something comparable.
Yeah.
So I don't know that rents per se affect that. I do think that not having mental health services for that segment of the population.
We would agree on that 100%.
So that they can get that help and then perhaps transition to the next step. And that's also what she mentioned, that their big push is towards helping with the mental health services so that we can get people better, feeling better, medically better, and then into jobs, and then naturally wanting to have your own spot, and then looking at rentals.
I would like to see more emphasis on that. I've talked about that in the past. I think that too often government and a lot of the existing programs, and nothing against nonprofits because they're doing things from a different perspective. But a lot of what we do, we're just handing out water bottles. We're enabling this we're perpetuating a problem. And I think we do need to focus on mental health, drug addiction, and overcoming these addictions if we want to move the needle at all.
I think drug addiction is central to that.
Yeah.
If you want to right now acquire some fentanyl here in Las Vegas and you want a couple of micrograms, it's $5. It's nothing.
Yeah.
You can fly a sign with a dog, or if you're a lady, you can make a good income, right? Particularly if you look kind of sad. Really at any intersection in town, and that's why you see virtually at every intersection in town.
Pandering, yeah.
You make $20 and you're kind of set for the next 48 hours.
Yeah.
And we make it, I'll hate to say it, too easy to be homeless on our streets. We've got 1,000 more people on our streets now than we did just 4 years ago. And I think the driving factor behind that is the easy access to high-powered fentanyl and methamphetamine that's coming over the border in numbers that we have really not ever seen before.
Yeah.
And until we get a handle on that, I believe rent prices certainly have an impact on a number of people who are homeless. You can't deny it. It's harder for people at the bottom end than it's ever been.
Yeah.
We've got to relieve some of that pressure for them. But for that contingent that is treatment resistant, we have to have a plan, and we have to make it exceedingly easy to get behavioral health, to enter treatment programs which enable access to a psychiatrist, so you can get methadone or Vivitrol or some of these other amazing pharmacology or pharmaceuticals that are on the market to help resolve
People
some of your
overcome
addiction
some
issues.
of these things.
Right?
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with that. We've drifted a little bit, but we're going to take another break here, and when we come back, we'll have some closing thoughts. We'll give our verdict on whether or not Nevada is ready for rent control. We'll be back with more of the Vegas Verdict coming up after this.
Legal troubles require swift action, and there's only one attorney who's quick on his feet.
Legal troubles don't wait, and neither should you. I'm Tony Abitangelo, a former judge with 30 years' experience. I know the judicial system, and I know what will work for you in court.
When your circumstance requires a skilled negotiator who knows the law, tap into Tony. He's a former judge who can defend your rights. Call 707-7000.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been having a great discussion today about rent control and whether Nevada is ready to impose some type of rent control here in our state. We've got Francesca Gilbert and Ryan Hamilton with us today. And you know what? Let's kick off some closing thoughts on this subject. We'll go ladies first. Francesca, rent control in Nevada. I mean, you've been a part of this kind of rental, and homeowner and brokerage environment for a very long time. What are your thoughts on on whether we should head in that direction.
I have. This is actually year 36 in the real estate industry.
Congrats.
I know. Started when I was 12. That's my story, as long as they make my hair color. I'm personally not pro
rent control
because in my mind, it has negative impacts. And one of the sort of forgotten impacts is that you don't actually know who gets to take advantage of the rent control. In many markets, specifically New York, where rent control has failed, largely the people who have gotten to take advantage of rent control are the people who don't need rent control, right? So the higher income demographically gets to have rent controlled apartments, but they're not the ones who need the lower rents.
It's a manipulation of the system.
It is, and so that's something that to me really goes against the American way, right? I mean, you're here, your dream is to buy a house or to live in your own house, and you don't have to own it. You can rent it, and it can still be your home. But rent control doesn't make that happen, in my opinion. So for me, it's a no. Now, could we put some overlays to help adjust pockets that need adjustment? I think so, but I think that's more left to the individual landlord and definitely to the individual state. It should not be anything that is federally controlled.
Yeah. Ryan, how about you? Closing thoughts on whether we need rent control?
I want to emphasize, I get why people want it. It's tough out there, and I don't think that people who want rent control are experiencing a phenomenon of the mind. It's economically more challenging than it has been in decades in this country. Interest rates, all the aforementioned, groceries, insurance costs, things like that, that we talked about. That having been said, I don't know that we're ready for it yet. I think, as I mentioned, there are several interventions that we could go through as a community, more targeted, before we would ask our landlords to take a cap on that, right? They're great members of the community. They provide a service. You need them wherever you go, right? You've got to have a place to live.
Good
and
point.
I think they're entitled to make a business like anybody else, is free from government intrusion or management, just like any other business. And we're just not at the point where we could reasonably ask them, I think, to take that hit. We've got to square away at the county some building permit issues. We've got to make sure the county and the federal delegation work together to get a lands bill passed. And I think there's a long way to go. So at this point, I mean, I understand why people want it, but I think over the long term, it's not going to be... it's not going to deliver what it promises, while some other things that we could look at probably will decrease prices, most notably putting more houses, more apartments to market.
Opening up that BLM land, for sure. I'm not unlike both of you. I'm also very compassionate and want to help people. I hate that one number that we threw out, $3,100 a month is the average income. I just think... To me, that says we need to diversify industry, diversify economy. When you diversify, you bring in other types of jobs. But in order to do that, you can't add more regulation, in my opinion. We've got to protect our tax environment. We got to make it easy for other industries to come here and make it attractive. And if you have more regulation, such as something like rent control, in my opinion, that will hinder the bigger picture. All right, I think we're ready to hand down a verdict. The way this works is I will count down from 3, and then we will either say yes or no. The question today is Nevada ready for rent control? So we'll go in 3, 2, 1. No. It is a unanimous decision today. No hung jury, as we have had so many times in the past. I think this would be. I think it would be a mistake. I could see why, people would perk up when they say, 5% cap. That's a lot more reasonable than, as we said earlier, someone receiving a rental notice of, hey, your rent's going up $250, or that's a huge hit when you're already scraping and you're just trying to maintain. By the way, I think there's a 60-day notice
there is
that landlords have to give, on a rent increase. I mean, that's technically, if they wanted to, every 2 months they could raise the rent. I mean, that's a little bit frightening as well. I don't think most of them do it that way, but technically they could do it. So Thanks so much for the discussion, Francesca and Ryan. It's been great having you both. And thank all of you who tuned in to watch this. This has been the Vegas Verdict. We are available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. And if you have some thoughts for a potential future subject, perhaps you'd like to join us on the show, please send me an email. Check out vegasverdict.com. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.